Welcome to this recording of our wonderful workshop panel on forgiveness and optimism with guests Fred Luskin, Joseph Saheb Bakhsh, Bruce Everett, Bishop Philip Huggins, Noirin Mosley, Jenny Boymal, and yours truly, Victor Burton. First, it's a wonderful welcome to our panelists. Fred just inspires me. You know, when we said there's a habit of optimism that is forgiveness, it's the inspiration of Fred Luskin, whose research over the last, 25 years shows that forgiveness is one of the great underpinnings of optimism. And it's just so wonderful to have you here, Fred. Joseph came forward and produced our animated edition on Project Optimism on the virtues of forgiveness. Bruce Everett has been writing in this space. What's wonderful about Bruce is he's the Asia Pacific head of world commerce and contracting. So it's all those people who blame each other in procurement and contracting and delivery. And Bruce is just a wonderful expert in this space of maintaining relationships in the face of things going wrong. So it's great to have you, Bruce. And Jenny and Noirin, Project Optimism, they just love the whole notion of how do we embed habits of optimism, and it's great to have you two here. So as I said, I'm going to ask a couple of questions. I'm going to throw to Jenny, I'm going to throw to Noirin, and then I'd like questions from you in the audience so we can lift you up onto the panel. So the first question, as I said to each of our participants, is that immortal question we always do at the Centre for Optimism: what makes you optimistic? So Fred, can I ask you, what makes you optimistic?
I thought you would answer that question or ask that question. And I wanted to give it a thoughtful answer, of course, being a big mouth professor. But I think there are two kinds of optimism, and one is much shallower than the other, but easier to do. So there's everything's going to be worked out, everything's going to be fine. That optimism, I think, has a little bit of denial and bypass to it, and sometimes lacks a lot of empathy. The deeper optimism that I can see comes from our own grit. And that was going to be my answer to you, that when we have persevered, when we have handled our life's difficulties, when we show care and compassion for other people as they go through their difficulties, that builds both muscles and memory and a sense that I can do what life asks of me. And so I guess my answer is some degree of history and grit, but it's got to be lived. So that would be my answer to you.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely brilliant. That notion of grit, that notion of action. And as people often tell me, there's no point being an optimist if there's no action. You're as bad as being a pessimist. So I think that really nails it. Now, Joseph, tell us what makes you optimistic.
Well, in my opinion, I think especially, I think this is something which applies to each and every one of us in a way around the world. I think it's hope and faith which makes, which we need to have with regards to whatever's going on. I mean, we are in this state of perpetual pause, all around the world, and obviously people are getting frustrated, especially at this present moment. But the only thing that we have moving forward is to just keep at it, just keep what we're doing, have that hope that things are going to get better, and have that faith, and in your own abilities, in your own strength of character to be able to keep going. So I think it's hope and faith which has kept me going, especially in the last couple of years, with regards to a lot of personal as well as professional stuff which has happened in my life. But obviously, COVID, took us, literally out of left field. Using a baseball analogy, I'm sure Fred will recognize. It literally just took us out of left field. It was like a slider, on base plate. I hope I'm using a baseball analogy properly, but regardless, it's really been interesting. I think this moment has given us all an opportunity to be able to self-reflect and introspect, which is very, very important in forgiveness in a way. Because the first thing is
we might come back to that, Joe, because this is going to be just a sort of 2-3 sentences what makes you optimistic. But I think next time, Fred and Joe, I will wear my San Francisco Giants orange sweater instead of the blazer. Bruce, what makes you optimistic?
Well, it's hard, Victor. It's hard in these times to be optimistic. When I shared last year what makes me optimistic, it was about our kids. It was about our young people and their potential for greatness, but also goodness, their sense of social impact and so forth. And I worry about them now through COVID with homeschooling and the anxiety and the uncertainty that they face. And this is mass trauma. And to Fred's point about having grit, having that lived experience, and Joseph's point about faith and hope, where do our youth get that from? They haven't lived this long enough to actually build those muscles that Fred talks about. So I do worry about them. I think it will be intergenerational. So I remain optimistic. Here in Australia, we had NAIDOC Week a couple of weeks ago, which celebrates our Aboriginal and Torres Islander peoples. And for them, they've gone through mass trauma, intergenerational depression. And we're still seeing our Indigenous folk who are starting to say, we've gone through that, but we still have something to offer. We've got our gifts of song, we've got our gifts of story, our culture, our experience that we can share with you, and they still want to bring those gifts. So I'm optimistic that hopefully from this mass trauma, our youth will be able to bring something fresh to us. It may not be just the economic pathway. It may be not climbing the ladder for success, because it will be defined in a different way because of this experience. So I'm optimistic. I'm looking forward to what this trauma will actually generate in our youth for the future.
And there's a really interesting study out of UNICEF, which actually says that the early evidence is that young people of today will be more resilient, just as my parents were after World War II and after my grandparents were after World War I and the Depression. So Fred, coming back to you, may I ask you, what have you learnt through this COVID experience and its impact on the community and, your community of researchers and teachers and students and people interested in forgiveness as a discipline, as an exercise, as something that can be learned?
Some of it is complex. Here in the United States, there's a lot of dissension about what is the appropriate response to the virus. Do you take a vaccine? Do you not take a vaccine? Do you wear a mask? Do you not wear a mask? There's a lot of acrimony about that. And so at one level, you see human beings who, like all of us, we don't actually know the answer to many of the problems that confront us. And so we have to do the best we can with almost always limited information and certain biases that we all have. The interesting piece to me, again, is like, how do you work that stuff out? Like, how do you offer enough respect for people who have different points of view? How do you allow your own point of view not to be so strongly held that you squeeze out everybody else's? And if you ask me from I'm going to say an optimistic forgiveness point of view, I think there's a basic trust that human beings ultimately err towards the positive or move towards the positive, even if it's very slow and halting.
Yeah, I think we've seen that, I think, in Melbourne. We've had 5 lockdowns. We had the world's longest lockdown.
Wow.
But what it's actually done is, a greater sense of community. People have actually got to know their neighbours more. I was talking to a lady yesterday who said she'd hardly known her next door neighbour, who's a lady in her 80s. now they pop in every day, just to check, and a cup of tea or a cup of coffee and the like. So, Joseph, you're in Singapore. What have you experienced during this COVID period, and people's attitudes to forgiveness?
Well, I think what I've noticed here is, like, especially in the last couple of weeks, I think Singapore has been really, really good. It has been one of the countries in the world which has handled the COVID situation pretty well, and that's basically due to the fact because it's such a small country. It's like 65 kilometers by 45 kilometers. That's it. Okay, that's Singapore. It's like literally a little red dot. But I think the main thing that Singapore has done is as Fred was mentioning, that and Bruce was mentioning earlier, that it's the sense of community has come together in a way. Like, absolutely. I mean, people in Singapore don't really. They're not that. What's the word? They're not that chatty, let's say, like Aussies, for example. But nowadays, people are opening up. They're talking to others around them. Like, if they're on public transport or just walking or at a restaurant, they're talking. They're interacting more, and they're being less on their mobile phones, so to speak, because people are wanting to be around other human beings, which has been, where it has been so many people around the world, where especially in Singapore right now, because it's very dependent on visitors, right? And we've had no visitors for like over a year and a half now in Singapore. So people are getting to learn more about the internal communities, the internal places. Like, I've been to places in Singapore in the last year and a half, which I never knew existed in the last 9 years that I've been here, because we just didn't have the reason to explore within our own community, so to speak. So it's been very, very interesting. However, the sense of frustration is creeping in, as you all must have seen, because like 5 days ago, Singapore literally went into like a non-lockdown period completely. Like, people were allowed to go to restaurants in groups of 5, etc. And then we had another cluster like 3 days ago, and everything's again closed down out here. Like, only 2 people are allowed to go out to meet someone at their house. Dining in is not allowed completely. Work from home has always been default since the beginning of the pandemic. So, and people are getting frustrated. Like today, when I was coming in, I was in the taxi, and the taxi driver was like, "This is just absolutely so frustrating with regards to just the changes." But that's where adaptability comes in as well, Victor. I'm sure we'll be discussing that a little bit further down the line with regards to how important
Joseph,
is.
I think the Pope must have been reading your mind, because he tweeted yesterday. And he said, during the summer break, the Italian summer break, he said, "I just wish people will get off their mobile phones and look other people in the eye," which is a beautiful thought from the Pope. Now, Bruce, you're at the cutting edge of commerce. So what have you seen, with cancelled shipping, cancelled flights, people being unreliable, dare I say it, hard to get Pfizer deliveries to Australia? What have you seen about, this forgiveness and optimism and frustration and anger?
Well, Victor, I think we need that forgiveness, because we've recognised that we are truly global. We've recognised we're global in our supply chains, as you say, in relation to supply of vaccines or personal protective equipment such as masks and scrubs and so on. And we've found that we had supply chain diversity and 5 alternate suppliers. Unfortunately, all of those suppliers were based in Wuhan in China, and therefore stocks stopped. So I think we've learnt that we are truly global. We've known that, but this pandemic has shown us how connected we are in that sense, just in terms of getting supplies. And I know there's concerns about pharmaceuticals now. Are we going to have standard pharmaceuticals for people like sufferers of diabetes and so on? So it's that strange sense that we're both global and we're local. As you said, we're learning about our local communities. We're saying we're all in this together until cross-border politics gets in the way. And we're learning about how we are resilient and we're strong until we get anxious and our mental health suffers, as we're experiencing so much, at least here in Australia, I'm sure around the world. So it's that strange sense that we are local and global at the same time. Certainly, we'd hope that we're getting through the 5 stages of grief that Kubler-Ross talk about, from blame and anger and denial and bargaining, and we're getting up to accepting this is our lot in life. And it's not going to be post-COVID, it's just going to be with COVID going forward. But the 6th stage that they've now added is around meaning. So what's the meaning we get from this? And that was my concern a year ago. I pondered, as we reflect on this in a year's time, will we have forgiveness, not only for the others who have stopped supply of Pfizer vaccines to Australia, for example, or forgiveness for our neighbour who hasn't been wearing their mask, or the 4th person that steps in the elevator with us, all these moral dilemmas. Will we have forgiveness for others? But more importantly, will we have forgiveness for ourselves? Will we have done the best we can in difficult circumstances? Will we have cared for others as best we could? Will we have cared for ourselves? Because this is tough. It's the 800-pound gorilla in the corner, which we have to acknowledge weighs heavily on us, even though we want to be perfect and we want to be caring and we want to be productive at work. So be kind, I suspect, is the learning I've had for the last year's experience.
And for you to learn it, because you're one of the kindest people I know. That's amazing. Hey, Philip Huggins, who's an Anglican bishop, but is also the president of the National Council of Churches in Australia, and a huge figure in Australia in interfaith and intercultural. And he travelled to India with me, where I saw him, in the most amazing Anglican Hindu, conversation. So, Philip, I think you did a funeral yesterday. You've shared the notes you've shared with your board on the National Council of Churches. So what are you seeing in terms of COVID and forgiveness and, the churches? And you'll have to unmute. Yep.
Good day, everybody. It's wonderful to listen to you all, and I think my learning is in symmetry with those that are being shared, like Bruce just now, looking for the meaning in this. The pandemic slowed me down. It slowed all of us down. And when I paused just to tell a story, I just remembered some of the amazing people I've met. I didn't go looking for them. I just happened to meet them over the last couple of years. And when I thought about them, very different disciplines, different ways of contributing, but the common thread was this endeavour to bring healing and wholeness and hope into people's lives. And so recently I kind of gathered them all together, and I said to them, look, we need a culture now that's more loving, more understanding, and more forgiving. And so we've begun this kind of conversation about how we create that cultural shift. So we intentionally create a culture that's more loving, more forgiving, more understanding, a culture in which we choose to heal and not to harm. And the conversation's starting to take off. In this period, we're trying to help people find the way that they can have the conversation at a local level. And it's very much consistent with what people are saying here. Getting to know neighbours, getting to become more aware of our codependence, our interdependence. The global is local, the local is global. And just really be intentional about how we do create a culture that's more loving, more forgiving, more understanding in this gift of life we're given on our tiny planet in this vast universe. So my reflection has been all these amazing people quietly, diligently, perhaps not knowing each other, but now linking them up so we can be a force for cultural change, cultural shift.
What I love that you've shared with us, Philip, is that this learning on forgiveness, of course, goes right back to the holy scriptures of Hinduism and Christianity and Islam, and some of the wisdom of St. Augustine and others. So anyone who wants to read that, Philip shared that on the website. and it's very powerful. Jenny, can I throw to you? You've got some really interesting questions and reflections on self-forgiveness that I think you wanted to raise with the panel.
Yes, thanks. Thank you, Victor. I think, wow, the conversation here has been amazing, and it's really about, forgiveness and how we're all interrelating to one another and working together and with kindness. And I love that conversation. I think it's also given a lot of people a lot of time, a lot of people's, I suppose, support networks have, for whatever, by nature of what's been going on, have been removed from them in the way that they're used to having them. And I think it's given people a lot of time to think about who is important in my life and what's going on and, what are my relationships like with different people. But I think these times of reflection also bring up the challenging relationships and the challenges that are going on. And obviously, when we talk about forgiveness, a lot of the time we talk about the notion of forgiving others. And I know that, I think culturally different people take that on in different ways. But I think a really interesting conversation, I'd love to pose it to the panel, is around forgiving ourselves. So I think one of the challenges is that we hold on to things, and it might be little things that we've done ourselves that, we're angry at ourselves for, those kind of sliding door moments that take us in a completely different direction, or it's about, just forgiving yourself for an interaction or something small. So I'd love, Fred, if you might start us off to talk about the concept of self-forgiveness and some of your insights on that.
There's a big misconception out there about self-forgiveness, that it's primarily about how you feel. And I think that's mistaken. The biggest aspect of self-forgiveness needs to be what you do. So if you've erred and harmed somebody, the key piece is apologizing, make amends, try to change. If you've screwed up your own life, same thing. Like there's a deep, and this is where the optimism is essential, that there has to be some hope that I can make a difference either in my life or somebody else's life for the better in this brief time we have on this planet. The key piece of self-forgiveness is to recognize that I have made a mistake, that maybe my mistake has hurt somebody or my error. But it's not, do I feel good about me? I mean, that's a secondary issue. The primary issue is, again, do I have enough optimism or something to try to go back out there and do something to make the world a better place, which may be as simple as an apology, but it may be an amends to be made. It may be entering psychotherapy or doing work or something to kind of rebalance this world that maybe in some way I took something from. So from that point of view, it's a very important aspect of how we human beings take and give to this mysterious universe.
Thank you. Thanks, Fred. I think that's really, brought a lot of insight to it. Bruce, do you want to add to that?
No, I want to go against what Fred just said, just to be controversial in his last few minutes with us. So Fred, I think you're right, obviously, about it's the act and it has flow-on ramifications, but feeling good is actually good for you. I thought you might talk about the neuroscience, which I'm starting to understand, which is the act of forgiveness, similar to what Philip was saying about having a good conversation in the community. It's about having a healthy conversation which reduces stress internally, reduces the, you want to pick up on the neuroscience and some of the health benefits of forgiveness in terms of depression, heart disease, diabetes, etc.?
Are you asking me?
Sorry, Fred, you were looking at me that you were trying to respond, so I was giving the opportunity. But my understanding
it's a good exchange. So yeah, so Fred, what do you think of what Bruce is saying?
I want to make one more point, which is very rarely made in these kind of discussions. I think the biggest problem, one of the biggest problems that the world faces is too much self-forgiveness, not enough. Human beings let each other and let ourselves off the hook way too often for the things that we do that are unkind, selfish, unconscious, and uncaring. So if you're going to ask me the key piece of self-forgiveness that needs to be addressed, it's give yourself less of it, but give other people more of it, because it's our blindness to our influence on this world and others that allows so much harm to be done. That being said, if you have this active, harsh, like grudge against yourself with really hostile self-talk, that needs to be ameliorated because it clearly will have physical and emotional health implications. That is a statement without argument. But I do so much of this that I see around that simple truth. If I didn't articulate that simple truth, then I'm sorry, and I'm going to have a full, my full accordance with what you said.
Fred, can I ask you, I think what you said there is really interesting. And I think it's interesting. I think possibly sometimes the people who are very quick to forgive themselves may be exactly the wrong people. So it's I suppose the punishment doesn't meet the crime and the punishment don't meet each other. But I think sometimes the people who are really kind and are really thoughtful, who actually hold on to that and struggle to forgive themselves when they are actually the ones that really should. And then the people who actually the crime is quite significant, just move on,
I'm going to say one more thing before I have to go on. I'm doing a webinar here in the United States. Forgiveness is an interior kind of full-bodied mind peace with one's own life. It exists separate from an object. So sometimes people, project that opposite towards themselves. Sometimes they project that opposite towards other people. Sometimes they project the opposite towards God or the universe. Forgiveness is releasing all that hostility and judgment and harshness, no matter where it's sent out, and returning back inside to a sense of peace with one's own life as it's been lived. And it's a lovely, safe space. And we try to understand it in these cognitive terms about the interaction. But it's a deeper internal quality of peace and acceptance that doesn't need the object as much as we think it does. Anyway, I do have to go. You guys have a lovely conversation. I remember last year enjoying talking. And so I thank you again for an invitation. And I'd be happy and delighted to speak to you all again. Thank you so much.
Fred, thank you so much.
Thanks, Fred.
You've inspired me with your research and work, and we wish you all the best in your global leadership in this space.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you. Victor, back to you.
Back to you, Jenny.
Oh, back to me.
Yeah, because I think we should get Joseph and Philip some insights into your question on self-forgiveness, because I know that they've both thought about that a lot as well.
Definitely. Joseph, do you want to join me and share your thoughts on this whole notion of self-forgiveness? Would love to hear your thoughts.
Absolutely, Noirin, and I think that it's a very interesting topic, so to speak. And I love what Fred said before he left with regards to that inner peace element and how important it is, which all starts from basically being able to look at yourself. But a couple of points which I'd like to raise here is, like, especially during this pandemic period, a lot of people are talking about COVID clarity, right? We are seeing things through a different point of view. People around us, situations around us, circumstances around us, etc. It's given us a lot more clarity because we are having a little bit more time to sort of be with ourselves, be with our thoughts, get a deeper understanding of people around us and how people react, etc. However, what I have personally noticed, and this is something, this is just out of pure self-introspection, is like we human beings can be overly critical of ourselves on most occasions. And that is something which we need to try and stop or reduce in a way. And also be overly critical about others. Let's stop having these knee-jerk reactions when, with regards to anything that happens. Take a moment to breathe, take a pause, just to see as to, okay, don't just have a knee-jerk reaction with regards to whatever happening around you, because you don't know what that other person is going through, perhaps. So, I mean, it's always very, very important. And this is something which I have, it's hard to do sometimes because, we are emotional beings, and human beings, they tend to react with whatever it's happening around them. But sometimes and that is the essence of forgiveness, in my opinion, is just sometimes you need to take a moment of pause to try and put yourself in the shoes of the other person in front of you and see what you would have done perhaps in that situation. And the thing is, clarity in conversation, as Bruce is mentioning, is so important. You need to be able to open the doors to a dialogue, not just a monologue, like where, you are telling someone what to do. You've got to have a dialogue. You've got to have that open communication, whether it be in your personal relationship, whether it be in the workplace, whether it be between friends, etc. Because, things which aren't said properly, they are lost in translation. So you need to have that open clarity in communication, and stop being, overly critical of yourself and of others around you. Just take a moment, and sometimes, as they say, in psychology, like if you feel that you're getting angry, or just take a moment, just count, till 10, and you'll be able to sort of just get your hormone levels to go down a little bit and stuff. So I mean, I think that's something which we should all, focus on in a way, with regards to not being overly critical of yourself, and just take a moment of pause and just put yourself in the shoes of the other person in front of you, because you don't know what they're going through.
Thanks, Joseph. I think, yeah, really, really insightful words there. Thank you. Philip, I know that the church and religion talks about forgiveness a lot. There's a lot of work in that area. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about the concept of self-forgiveness and how you see that?
Thank you. Just two little stories. Talking with another older clergy person recently, I asked what were the words of the Gospels that meant the most to that person. And he said the words about forgiveness. And I said, why? And he said, because the older you get, the more there is to forgive. And I think that's the truth. And so grabbing onto those words of forgiveness is really important. How I practice that, I practice the Jesus prayer, a mantric form of meditation, Jesus have mercy. And so when I become aware of something that's haunting me as a result of some mistake, failure I've made, times past, more recent, I pray, Jesus, have mercy, so that the word, that then I have that capacity to let go of that and trust in the forgiveness that comes from God, the grace that comes from God. So it's really a way of appropriating that grace that is freely ours to get, and therefore not punishing oneself and not receiving that which in God's gracious heart is there for us. And the second little reflection about the forgiving of others, with they're all connected, is the practice of trying to meet each person afresh each time, and not to carry negative stereotypes you may have shaped as a result of past encounters with that person into the present encounter. Because the mystery of self is one thing, the mystery of the other is another thing. And you never really know another person entirely, and you do not know the capacity they may have in a new moment to be utterly different to the way you've known them before. And so coming to each encounter afresh and leaving behind, not letting past activity influence the way you relate to them, gives the opportunity for new beginnings. For example, recently, in one of the areas of advocacy I'm involved in, we were encouraged to have some conversations with our current Prime Minister. Some of the people had in their dialogue clearly quite negative stereotypes of our current Prime Minister. So that in order to make the best of the possibility of meeting with him, we had this conversation. How do you enter this conversation free of the past and ready to see things afresh for the new possibility, the better possibility to actually emerge? So there's a couple of thoughts.
Look, Philip, I'm going to just say to you, like, I think that one concept there, I think, you know, we can all take on, and I certainly will be taking that with me. So thank you so much. Noirin, over to you.
Thank you. I'm getting lots of messages on my screen. I have unmuted myself. Hi, Philip, you've kind of answered just two questions. You've already kind of answered one of them for me around the forgiving of others. So that's really interesting. Thank you for that. But I was going to ask more generally of perhaps Joseph and Bruce as well. And Bruce, you touched on this a little while ago as well. And that is, you know, forgiveness of others at a macro level and an individual level. So when I say macro, I mean, I'm looking around at Australia. Obviously, I'm a new Australian, but I've been here a while now. And I've always sort of seen it as the, you know, we are one, we are many, and we're all Australians. And now we're all just states, aren't we? And, you know, I just think there's going to be a lot of forgiveness needed, I think, in this space from a macro level. Particularly, and then this comes to a micro level or to an individual level, particularly when the consequences of people's actions still endure and can still be seen and still have an impact. So, you know, when someone does something wrong to someone individually, you know, it's very hard to forgive that person. But when people are affected in a more macro way, from state to state in this case, how can that be managed? You know, how can we do that? We need to, I know, but what are your thoughts around how we can do that? Bruce, if you want to go first.
Yes, certainly, Noirin. I think if we use the language of mass trauma associated with COVID-19, not only the health impacts, but also the economic impacts, as we see with small to medium enterprises just closing all over the place. So the science of mass trauma actually talks about you need to acknowledge the event. You need to not forget that this has occurred, that this is having an impact on us. One of the ways of moving to forgiveness is to have this discussion, the conversation that Philip talks about in terms of forgetting and forgiving. So if we just move on from this, and we say, okay, it was just another outbreak and we've moved on and we continue with our lives, we lose the opportunity to reflect on this trauma individually, corporately and globally that's impacted us. So I think we need to have some sort of ceremony, some sort of event to be able to claim this has had an effect on us, and how do we take it in, how do we acknowledge it, and how do we move on from there? So Desmond Tutu in his book talked about there's no future without forgiveness. Optimists believe there's a future. That's one of our characteristics. So, but we need to not do it superficially, as Fred said. He said optimism can often be shallow, but it's easy to be optimistic. I think forgiveness is the same. We can't be shallow. It can't just be an act of forgiveness. It needs to be true action, needs to acknowledge the hurt done to each of us and then move on, I think is the staging of this healing process that we will have to go through. And we're not at that point. We're still in the midst of this hurt, unfortunately.
Indeed. Do you have any suggestions? What could that look like as a nation?
And Philip, I call on your experience here as well. But
that's really interesting. I find that really interesting.
I'll introduce you to this book, for example, that I've just picked up off my desk, which is really about the healing associated with our Indigenous peoples. So this is 200 years of mass trauma, which we're still trying to work out, how do we deal with that? How do each of us, white fella and black fella, process that and move on? So we've had statements of the heart, which said this is where we are and where we want to go in the future. And we want to bring our gifts as Indigenous people into mainstream society. But we haven't really necessarily had those key events. There's a call for a treaty, for example, and the state of Victoria is moving to a treaty. So key events to actually symbolise the stage that we're at, to allow time for reflection. And certainly, Philip, in our religious world, have these rituals of acknowledgement, rituals of acceptance, rituals of celebration. I'm conducting a funeral next Monday, 10 people, unfortunately, with live stream, but it's very much about, here's an event which celebrates the life of this person, helps the people who are going through the pain or grief, and then looks forward with hope and with faith, as Joseph has said, to the future. So I think we need to have some sort of events where the whole community participates. And we've had that, just to finish on that, we've had that around our bushfires, which were devastating in November through to February 2019, 2020. We had concerts which have acknowledged the work of our frontline workers, in that case, our fireys. So some of that, I think, will be helpful to start the process of healing. But this is going to be intergenerational.
Brilliant. I really like that idea. I think there's a lot for us to think about on that alone. Thank you. Joseph, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I fully agree with Bruce, and especially that one word, which absolutely sums it all up, is acknowledgement. We have to acknowledge. There is no short-term band-aid. You slap on a band-aid and it's going to heal. No, it's intergenerational, as he has very rightly said. We've come to this. It's a long-term thing. We can't expect things to just at the snap of a finger get back to normal. We've got to accept the fact that this is something which has happened. This is something which is going to be remaining in society, within the community, for years to come, unfortunately. And we need to acknowledge. And the other main element is we need to have more dialogue with different parties, with different kinds of views. I think what a lot of countries, what a lot of people are seeing in different regions, especially with COVID, is people are shutting down people who have an opinion which is not their own, in a way. I think there needs to be more dialogue. There needs to be more clarity in communication, because two heads are better than one. You may not be doing the best thing possible if you don't take everyone else's ideas into consideration. And that's something which I think ruling parties and different governments around the world need to take into effect. There really needs to be more dialogue, and let's leave aside politics. Let's leave aside all our differences, and come together as one humanity, one community, and try to get through this as a world community, so to speak. So I was listening to the song "Heal the World" yesterday, by Michael Jackson, and it's so true. And it just gave me goosebumps listening to the words. See, this is what I'm trying to say. Is we can all talk a great talk, but the thing is, how many of us are ready to actually walk the talk that we talk about? And that is where one needs to put their actions into perspective, and they need to do what they say is the right thing. And that's it. It all boils down to the fact that we all need to, in a way, try and understand that we don't know everything. We could work together with another person whose opinions we may not fully agree with, but there are certain elements. Just take the good aspects of every element and just have an open conversation and come to a conclusion. I think that's what's missing, especially in today's world.
I love that. I really, really love that, Joseph. I think really
especially especially Noirin. I mean, I've been in Australia for so long, but I'm presently in Singapore now, and I watch the ABC news every single day in Channel 7, Channel 9. I see all the different states blaming each other. I mean, come on, what's going on? You need to work together on this, right?
Yeah.
And it's not just in Australia, it's everywhere in the world. Like, for example, in India, we saw the huge outbreaks, like 400,000 people in a daily basis were being infected. Thousands of people dying. Yesterday, I was seeing this news where it says that 4 million people have allegedly died in India in the last couple of months, which is 10 times more than what has been officially reported. I'm like, this isn't the time to point fingers at each other. This is the time to come together as a community and see what you can do for others around you. Like, for example, I was noticing on radio, on the TV last week. So I can't remember the name of this hashtag, but it's a hashtag which is pretty widely prevalent.
Oh, no. Lost.
Can you hear me?
Sorry, no, I've lost you for a second. But Joseph, actually, sorry, I'm just realizing the time. Actually, I'm loving all this discussion and the diversity and inclusion point, and everyone's voice needing to be heard, and Bruce's point about there being some kind of an activity to acknowledge all of this. I mean, these are all really, really interesting things. Philip, I loved your point as well earlier. I think you addressed that before I even asked it, so thank you. I'm going to call in because I see Gary and I see Scott up on top there. I'd love to call Gary up with Ellie. Is that right? Is Ellie still there? How are you, Ellie? And maybe just ask a little bit about your thoughts on forgiveness and optimism, more broadly perhaps at this stage.
Yeah, well, I've had to get Ellie excluded from her lessons today from school. I knew that this was a far better investment in time for her than attending school, homeschooling. But I mean, I suppose that in life, there's a few things that are certain. That you have your birth, you have some experience, and then you pass away, sadly. Yeah. But within that, you do get grief, and you have excitement and a whole range of things. There's a few things that a few sort of points that or concepts I perhaps would like to share with people that may resonate. We will all have different ways of looking at the world, irrespective of what they might be, but we'll all have different ways of looking at them. I'm a designer, as Victor knows, and my aspect in life is to try and look at things in a wholesome way, so that I can find where things can be improved and fixed and so on. So that's how I view my work, but also my life too. So I do try and live a reasonably wholesome life, one that is filled with beliefs, and those beliefs, really I sort of learned through childhood, having a very loving family, but not everyone has the luxury or the wealth of that. But in my time, I've encountered a few things that might resonate. One is the idea of being a spring. We sort of wobble around and we do things, and when we go through good times, we're wobbling and we've got loads of energy, and when we're a little bit sort of suppressed or depressed, we tend to become very tense springs, and those springs, when the weight that's bearing down upon them is lifted off, the tension can still be there. And the idea of grieving takes time, and through that time, which can appear to be an eternity, you sort of eventually come back to yourself.
Sorry, I was going to actually just ask Gary. Sorry, Gary, I was going to ask Philip to jump in perhaps on that very point. Actually, Philip, did you want to jump in on that particular point that Gary just made? I think it had your name on it.
It's about belief and sort of how one lives one's life and how one sees one's life in the cosmos, in a sense. It's more of a wholesome approach to life and being a spring, and trying to recognizing that we are this thing that's being affected.
Well, I think it, in a way, it comes down to how we start each day. So I start the day with, obviously saying a prayer and reading the Bible. And then I go for a swim in the ocean. And the moment the ocean's quite cool down here in southern Victoria, but it's just a wonderful way of remembering the gift of a new day. Here we are on this tiny planet in this vast universe, the end of which still hasn't been found, stars out beyond Saturn, with this gift of life between the mysteries of birth and death and something called eternity. And I think the morning rituals help us to kind of refocus on the gift of each new day and the possibility of what we might do with that new day. And as I swim around in the ocean, keeping an eye out for anything that looks like a fin, it helps me begin the day well.
Love it.
The other point, Noirin, if I could just mention it, or just we might sort of move on quite quickly. But I sat in the audience once with listening to a very accomplished salesperson. And, I've got my views about salespeople, but anyway, I'll keep those to myself. But he sort of likened his work and the work of a really good salesperson as having a notional bucket. And, he paid forward quite frequently. So he'd give someone a compliment, he would do something that was nice. And, he had this vision of someone having a bucket next to them. And, when he sort of had filled it up with almost to the top, he was more likely going to get the sale that it was looking for. And, although that's very much a sales orientated approach, just this wholesome, waking up in the morning and sort of being very conscious of yourself, as Philip was talking about, you could also, if it helps, have more of a bucket approach. You could almost sort of liken your life to a bucket, one which you need to fill with things and take things out of even, the idea of, giving less grief to create a better world and, giving more than what you take. So, I think the bucket,
a bit more light than darkness, really, that's.
Yeah, it is really. And I'm very conscious that usually we laugh and usually we sing. And my daughter's given me a lovely hat to wear. So I'm more than happy having a laugh later, Victor.
Well, I think we're about to head into that. But I think before we do that, we're going to jump to Scott for a comment or a question.
Thank you. And it's been fascinating to listen. In fact, I left the screen and sat on the couch and just listened to the voices rather than looking at who was speaking. And it brought a whole different perspective to the conversation, which I enjoyed. One of the notion that I've often asked some questions of Victor and, the difference between happiness and optimism. Are you only optimistic when you're happy, or can you only be happy when you're optimistic, and those sorts of things. And another question's come to me from the discussions around forgiveness, and that is that while, forgiveness is within your own ability to either forgive yourself or forgive others, what if you're not forgiven by another? So we talk about, I think someone was discussing before,
Good point.
And then where does that go with an optimistic view or a happy view on the future? If you've apologised, or and I'm thinking of, say, the Prime Minister who, should forgive all those who are giving him a hard time, or an argument I might have had with somebody or whatever. You can forgive, but what if the forgiveness doesn't come back? You just need to live with the.
Great question.
I don't know the answer to it.
Bruce, did you want to jump in on that to Scott just quickly before we go to singing and other things?
Yeah, I like to be happy, but I'd prefer to know what meaning is.
Sorry, I didn't. What was that? Sorry.
I like to be happy.
Yes.
And my mother said that the secret of life is being happy and getting on with people. But I think for me, it's more about discovering meaning. And I think meaning is through belonging. Meaning is through doing something meaningful. Meaning is having an impact on other people. So for me, it's more that search for meaning than the search for happiness. And I've put in a TED talk which speaks to that point as well for people in the audience.
Thank you.
The unforgiven, that notion of the unforgiven. So, I mean, as a former politician, I door-knocked 40,000 houses. I've met thousands and thousands of people, and there's some people who just disappear for your life, or they ignore you, or you feel a tension with them that's unexpressed. And so I'm just wondering, Philip and Joseph, in your experience, this notion of being unforgiven, you'd like to have that person reciprocate, but they don't. I think that's what you're getting at, Scott, isn't it? Because you're
yes.
flying doctors, you're chairman of 2 or 3 charities, you're doing great work, but there's probably a few people who, don't like you.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, you don't.
And that's such a
Philip, Joe.
Yeah. And that's such a fantastic question that Scott has just brought up, because you can do all from within you to try and forgive someone else. But what if you're not being forgiven from the other person? From that, I'd like to actually go back to what Gary was saying with his bucket approach. Sometimes in life, you really need to be able to cut people out or remove stuff as well, because some people will become weeds rather than roots in your life. And that is when, the moment you sort of understand as to, who are the weeds and who are the roots, that, and the moment you realize that, and people who uplift you and make you better rather than people who are actually literally like wearing you out. And that's very, very important. I loved what Gary said before with regards to the bucket approach and his spring analogy. And I think that's very important. Like, there is no way, and as they say, Scott, you want everyone to love you, sell ice cream, right? Simple as that. So, there's always going to be people, who are not going to like you. There's always going to be people who won't agree with your opinions. There's always going to be people, whatever you do with them, to them, for them, they will never appreciate the person that you are, what you're doing. And that's where you really need to be able to remove yourself from that situation and take that bucket approach. Sometimes you need to remove yourself. Sometimes you need to remove others, from particular situations or particular circumstances. So that's just my opinion. Gary, thanks for giving that analogy before. I think it's very helpful in a lot of different circumstances.
Well, we have reached the 11:29 mark. The hour always flies by, but I always promise people that we're going to finish on the hour. So what we'll do then is, if a few of the panelists, if you've got a few minutes extra, because Philip, I've got a question for you from Paul Ramage that I've got to ask, and there are other people. And Joseph's got his orange hat.
Yes.
And the Millers are wearing their hats, so we are going to have to do some laughter as well. So look, on behalf of the Centre for Optimism and Project Optimism, I'd like to thank you, Bruce. I'd like to thank you, Joseph. I'd like to thank you, Philip. Fred, of course, is always this huge joy, and it was great that he could join us for half an hour. Scott, I love your questions. Gary and Ellie, you're always a font of wisdom, and Ellie, a great sense of fun. And to my 2 comrades in Project Optimism, Noirin and Jenny, I thank you so much. So now we've formally finished. Now we've had a special request for some laughter. So while I'm bringing you all online, there's a question to you from Paul Ramage, Philip, and the others can jump in. Can you please some reflections on what it means in this new world to be grateful? What are some positive, practical ways to be grateful? So,
my wife gave me a plum pudding this morning.
So it's that thank you. It's expressing thank you, isn't it? Bruce?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for small puddings. Thank you for small mercies. There's so much to be thankful for. This conversation we've had, the fact that we're alive and kicking to have it. So lots to be thankful for. And that also helps our neuroscience in terms of knocking cortisol on the head. which is a response to flight and fight that we've been in constantly every time we hear the news about how many cases we've had overnight. So we need to encourage the happy juice, the serotonins and the endorphins and so forth. So gratitude helps in that, Victor, as well.
And Joseph?
I think gratitude is so important, and just to go on from what Bruce was saying, we need to appreciate the little things in life. Simple as that. And when we were having a chat yesterday, Victor, you were like, just wear something, orange and yellow. I was like, what do I do? So I went out and went to this store which sells party stuff, and I was like, all right, give me your most outlandish orange hat, and this is what I got, and it works, it's sunflowers on it, and there's one sticking out from on top of my head, and I was like, yeah, okay, I'm gonna look like a fool, but that's fine, sometimes you just have to just be a child, bring out your inner child from within you. So it's important to be grateful for the little things in life. I'm grateful for my amazing friends from around the world. I guess without whom I wouldn't have been able to get through most of the pandemic element that we've had in the last couple of years, so to speak, almost.
And who else would like to comment on that? Well, now I'm giving a responsibility to the younger people. We've got Ellie and Jenny. Which boy have you got there?
Ellie.
Two Ellies. So Ellie has done our laughter, and I'm sure the other Ellie has heard the laughter in our events. And I know Sonia Law is online. She's got throw kindness around like confetti. But she hosted an event last week, the Australian Human Resources Summit, and she helped me lead the laughter yoga. So much so that the people in the neighbouring halls used the same line that they used from that film When Harry Met Sally. I'd love a bit of what they've got. So can I ask the two Ellies, I'm just going to bring 4 or 5 people more online. Just you two say hello to each other.
Hi. And everyone on mute and show us your camera if you can.
All right, so Noirin, I'm going to give you the responsibility because I'm just bringing everyone online. You and the two Ellies will have to lead the laughter.
No, but Victor, we need you. We need you, right? It's not the same as we hear you, right?
So everyone unmute, put the cameras on.
Let's just have a laugh before we go on.
One more person to bring on. Rebecca, if you can. Oh, I can't bring Rebecca on for some reason. But yeah, oh no, hang on, Rebecca, let me just.
So great to see everyone.
There we are. So everyone, if you can put your cameras on. Charles Covest, put your camera on. Alison, Rod Wade, I know you're probably, it's still evening in San Diego, so get your cocktail out. We're happy to look at it. Deethi's there in India and she's not in her pajamas, so that's a good thing. Dennis, what about switching the video on? You're looking so happy in that photograph anyway. So, Ellie, and Ellie, is that your brother? Morgan?
He likes a laugh.
You guys are going to do the 1, 2, 3 on getting us to start laughing.
1, 2, 3.
And young world, a bit of laughter.
I've been laughing.
Oh God, my ribs are hurting. You two Ellie did that well.